Point is leaving the Istanbul Convention, a feminist treaty that I've already read the first 6 chapters of, as well as the preamble. Today it will be a bit about immigration, and the treaty shows how our elites basically use every single topic to flush Western countries with immigration from somewhere else and to keep the people inside. Yeah, so let's start. So now we get to the relevant part, which is the Chapter VII, migration and asylum. I have already introduced the 3 pillars that I believe run through everything here, which is stuff that has already been done or is one-timer to be done, stuff that you object to and you don't want to do, so that's another argument to actually leave the convention. Then there's stuff that is supposed to blur the lines between NGOs and the government, and this is a bit more of that one, but it's separate in the way that it directly aids the immigration business and is very specified. Article 59, residence status. Number 1. Parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to ensure that victims whose residence status depends on that of the spouse or partner as recognized by internal law in the event of the dissolution of the marriage or the relationship are granted in the event of particularly difficult circumstances upon application an autonomous residence permit irrespective of the duration of the marriage or the relationship. The conditions relating to the granting and duration of the autonomous residence permit are established by internal law. So this might be a case of a provision that you just simply may disagree with, because it gives an incentive to claim you had been the victim of violence and maybe you haven't. And the thing is, if you are well integrated, if you have a job, if you have a network and so forth, it isn't terribly hard to actually get residency in a country. If you don't, maybe it's also not that bad to leave, to go back home, because ultimately the network and so forth, they were looking at your husband and your marriage and probably knew that something is going on, that you're mistreated and so forth, and then maybe it isn't the best social environment anyway, and you should go home, right? So there's no good reason to make it easier for a victim claimant to remain in the country. Number 2, parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to ensure that victims may obtain the suspension of expulsion proceedings initiated in relation to a resistance status dependent on that of the spouse or partners as recognized. So in this case, we are even talking about somebody who is short of expulsion. So there have already been some proceedings going on. There are good reasons why this person should leave the country, and you should stop it when the person says that she was attacked. Number 3, a party shall issue a renewable residence permit to victims in one of the 2 following situations, or in both. A, where the competent authority considers that their stay is necessary owing to their personal situation. B, where the competent authority considers that their stay is necessary for the purpose of their cooperation with the competent authorities in investigation or criminal proceedings. I think where the crime is severe, most legislations do have some mechanism in place to keep the witnesses in the country. If not, that's a one-off. However, if the case is not severe, this is just an additional incentive for a woman to claim that she was beaten when maybe she wasn't. Number 4, parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to ensure that victims of forced marriage brought into another country for the purpose of the marriage and who as a result have lost their residence status in the country where they habitually reside may regain the status. So this is now the situation where you have been living all your life in Poland, and suddenly your family marries you or forces you to marry off to a Russian, and therefore you lose your residence status in Poland. How many cases are we even talking here? Article 60, gender-based asylum claims. Number 1, parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to ensure that gender-based violence against women may be recognized as a form of persecution within the meaning of Article 1A2 of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, and as a form of serious harm, giving rise to complementary subsidiary protection. Which I find insane because there is no such thing as persecution of women, and it had never been historically. So, why invent something that does not exist and create a legal status for people? There are no pogroms against women. Women are not eradicated in any place. There are no gender cleansings going on. This is a fantasy of the feminists. It's not a real life situation. I do understand that women have a harder time in Afghanistan and so forth, but we are talking about women who come from that culture and who prop that culture up. If you ask men and women in Afghanistan who wants stricter corporal punishment, harder laws, tougher Sharia and so forth, it tends to be rather the women who want more of it. So, if you're a woman from there and you're kind of supportive of what's going on there, maybe you should go. Number 2, parties shall ensure that a gender-sensitive interpretation is given to each of the convention grounds. And here they mean the Refugee Convention of 1951, not this Istanbul Convention. And that where it is established and the persecution feared is for one or more of these grounds, applicants shall be granted refugee status according to the applicable relevant instruments. So I don't really understand exactly what kind of persecution they believe to find, but I would say there's not a single case. I think there's not a single case where where you find, that convention of 1951 about the refugees, and it says, subject to ethnic cleansing or subject to a war or whatever battle starts right in your garden. I don't know what cases are mentioned in that convention, but I don't think that there is anything that is related to women. You are particularly subject to the battle in your garden, and you're particularly subject to the ethnic cleaning, and therefore as a woman you have to come here. That does not exist. I think there's not a single case where this number makes sense. Number 3 is parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to develop gender-sensitive reception procedures and support services for asylum seekers, as well as gender guidelines and gender-sensitive asylum procedures, including refugee status determination and application for international protection. Whatever the heck that means, I think they just want more sinecure offices. They want more NGOs meddling in government procedures. Article 61, non-refoulement. Non-refoulement is the idea that you cannot send somebody back into a country where he or she is still persecuted. But as I said, there is no woman persecution. There are no anti-women wars and so forth. Women, they are part of every group naturally, biologically. So they are not persecuted. They are not a minority. And number 1, parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to respect the principle of non-refoulement in accordance with existing obligations under international law. Parties shall take the necessary legislative or other measures to ensure that victims of violence against women who are in need of protection, regardless of their status or residency or residence, shall not be returned under any circumstances to any country where their life would be at risk or where they might be subjected to torture or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. As I said, there are no such persecutions against women. But I also must say that the cruelty of a punishment lies in the eyes of the beholder, and only because a country tortures or uses the capital punishment. I mean, we are talking Europe here. They pretend that capital punishment, which is exercised by democratic countries like Japan and the United States, where like, I don't know, stretching somebody on our legs and hands until he rips apart. If there had been due process and somebody has committed a very severe crime, he has it coming. And this is not inhumane or degrading or against the dignity of the person. If you are killing a number of children or whatever, you have it coming. I understand that my view is very controversial. The death penalty makes people as emotional as abortion makes others, but I personally think it is one thing to give the government the power to execute its own prisoners, which I'm also, I personally am also agreeable with that. But, if you are opposed to the death penalty, you might be for the reason that you don't want to give that much power to the government, also in fear that it may abuse its power and execute people for political reasons and not because they are punishing actual murderers. A final note on Turkey, because they are also considering to exit the Istanbul Convention at the moment. They have abolished the death penalty, but they also have very harsh prisons, and they also have long sentences for things that I consider should not be punished in the first place. There are terror charges that are very unsubstantiated and so forth. There are a lot of issues with the penalty system in Turkey, but formally that convention would not stop any other partner of the European Council to extradite any person to Turkey, despite their cruelty to some of their citizens for purely political reasons. The treaty also presents femicide as an issue, as you've just heard. They kind of pretend that women are persecuted or whatever, which is the case nowhere. And the Turkish opposition that tries to keep the country in that convention play with that feminist idea that the murders against so many women in their country were a femicide. This is not the case. They are honor killings. This is something conducted within their families very often. This has to do with a culture that has no open debate. It does not get rid of bad traditions and owns the good ones. There are dysfunctions in the culture that have to be resolved, but cannot be resolved through an international treaty. That was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.